Imagine for a second that you are a homicide detective,
Okay.
and the year is 1974. You're sitting across a metal interrogation table from a man who casually claims he is a psychic.
Right, which immediately puts you on the defensive.
Exactly. You are naturally skeptical. I mean, people confess to things they didn't do all the time, or they just, they want the attention.
Yeah, it happens constantly in high-profile cases.
But then this man leans forward and starts feeding you incredibly specific, unreleased details about the exact murder case you are currently trying to solve.
Oh, wow.
Details the public doesn't know,
Yeah.
details he shouldn't possibly be able to articulate.
Right.
So as you sit there in that smoky interrogation room, staring at him under the fluorescent lights, you have to ask yourself a really terrifying question. Is this guy actually clairvoyant, or are you looking straight into the eyes of the killer?
It is the ultimate detective's dilemma. And in the context of this specific investigation, it's really merely one piece of an incredibly complex, deeply layered puzzle. A puzzle that took law enforcement over 3 decades to fully piece together.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We're looking at a cold case from 1974, specifically the murder of a 22-year-old college student named Barbara Rocky.
And our source material today is a comprehensive true crime account that tracks over 30 years of this relentless investigation.
Yes. Our mission for this deep dive is to unpack not just the central mystery of the whodunit, which, by the way, is a wild ride from start to finish,
It really is.
but we want to really get into the psychology of both the victim and the killer. We're going to explore the cutting-edge science of the era, and we're going to look at the almost prophetic forensic foresight of a 1970s investigator.
An investigator who collected a piece of evidence so bizarre, it eventually solved the case 25 years later?
Yeah, actually. But to fully grasp the gravity of this story, we first have to establish the broader context of the era.
Yeah, picture the grainy 1970s crime scene photos. The vintage police cruisers, the complete lack of cell phones or modern surveillance. You have to contrast that analog world with the high-tech DNA readouts we rely on today.
Right, it's a completely different landscape.
Completely. And 1974 was famously known across the United States as the Year of Fear.
The year of fear.
Yes, there were highly active, highly publicized serial killers operating across the country. These crimes were fundamentally changing the American psyche.
They were altering how safe people felt in their own neighborhoods, on their own college campuses.
Exactly. And that underlying cultural tension is woven through every single part of Barbara's story.
And before we get into the timeline of what actually happened, I want you, the listener, to think about something. Have you ever had a gut feeling about someone that you completely ignored because they were close to you?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Like maybe someone in your inner circle who just made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up for a split second, but you brushed it off because you thought, I know them, they're safe.
Right, you rationalize it.
You do. Keep that feeling in mind as we dive into Barbara's story. Because in March of 1974, Barbara was a 22-year-old living in Provo, Utah.
She was originally from California, very much a free spirit, someone who liked exploring new philosophies.
Yeah, and she decided to study at Brigham Young University, or BYU, largely because she was academically fascinated by religion. She wanted to study it up close.
She approached it almost like an anthropological study. She thought attending a university structured entirely around a specific faith would be intellectually stimulating.
But the reality of that environment hit her incredibly hard.
It did. BYU had a very strict set of behavioral rules and a devout Mormon lifestyle that was strictly adhered to by the vast majority of the student body.
And Barbara was not a practicing Mormon, so she almost immediately felt deeply alienated.
Her classmates were attending church for hours every week, following rigid social values.
While Barbara was, dating around, drinking coffee, exploring different secular philosophies, she was an outsider in a world governed by strict conformity.
Okay, let's unpack this, because how Barbara handled that profound isolation is fascinating.
It really is.
By January of 1974, she had moved into an off-campus house with 7 other girls. She was hoping a change of scenery might give her a fresh start.
But within 2 months, the cultural divide was obvious. Her roommates thought her lifestyle was strange. They judged her.
So instead of trying to conform or win their approval, Barbara decided to lean into the rebellion.
She actively started trying to make her roommates uncomfortable.
Yes, she would leave weird books around. She even started telling them with a completely straight face that she prayed to the devil.
Wow.
Yeah, she went from just being the quirky roommate to actively terrifying the girls she lived with.
Psychologically speaking, this is a textbook defense mechanism. It's often referred to as preemptive rejection or reaction formation.
Make them reject you before they can reject you for who you really are. Exactly. If you feel deeply rejected by a group, the pain of that lack of acceptance can be overwhelming. So to protect your ego, you might intentionally behave in ways that push those people away.
By actively making them dislike you, you create an illusion of control over your own isolation.
Right. You aren't being cast out. You are choosing to be the villain.
But the profound tragedy of this coping mechanism is that it left Barbara completely without a support system in her own home.
She burned every bridge she had. And we have to remember, the national climate we just discussed. This wasn't just a lonely time for Barbara. It was an objectively dangerous time to be a young college woman.
Absolutely. The news cycle was dominated by stories of young women being attacked or vanishing from college campuses across the West Coast.
In January of that year, a student in Washington state was brutally beaten in her dorm room, and another went missing the very next month.
For Barbara, this was hitting way too close to home. She shared distinct physical characteristics with several of these victims. She had long, dark hair, parted down the middle, and similar facial features.
She was paralyzed by fear.
And she took that ambient threat incredibly seriously. She wasn't just casually worried, she was taking significant precautions to ensure her own survival.
She enrolled in self-defense and judo classes on campus.
And even more drastically, for a young college student, she decided she needed a firearm for protection.
Right. So she reached out to her closest friend at school, a young man named Jerry Hicker,
Yeah.
and had him help her navigate purchasing a handgun.
There is a massive detail here that sets the stage for everything that follows. Just a few weeks before our story reaches its boiling point, Barbara realized her newly purchased gun was missing from her room.
Just gone.
Gone. She searched everywhere, had no idea where it went, and formally reported it stolen to the campus police.
So put yourself in her shoes. She is alienated from her roommates. She's terrified of the serial killers dominating the evening news.
And her only means of serious lethal protection has vanished into thin air.
This escalating paranoia leads directly to her escape plan. On the morning of March 11th, 1974, Barbara sits at her desk and writes a goodbye letter to her 7 roommates.
It is important to clarify that this was not a suicide note, though the vague wording would cause it to be mistaken for one later.
Right, it was a literal statement that she could no longer tolerate the environment and was leaving campus to find people who actually understood her.
Specifically, she was planning to go see an older man named Richard Finder. He was a self-proclaimed psychic she had met after calling into a late-night radio show.
Over the previous months, they had developed an intense, spiritual, and mildly romantic relationship purely over the telephone.
But she needed immediate funds to make that trip happen. So she grabs her most valuable personal possession, a heavy turquoise necklace. She plans to pawn it in Salt Lake City for seed money to start her new life.
And that morning, her best friend, Jerry Hicker, the same guy who helped her buy the gun, pulls into her driveway.
He had borrowed her car the day before to go skiing and was dropping it off. Jerry casually asks if they are still hanging out later that afternoon.
Barbara brushes him off. She tells him she's in a massive rush, takes her car keys, goes to her morning class, and then drives off to pawn her necklace.
That mundane morning exchange is the last time she is seen living her normal life.
Which brings us to the actual disappearance. When Barbara doesn't show up for her afternoon plans with Jerry, he seemingly becomes the concerned best friend.
He walks over to her house, notices her car isn't in the driveway, and starts heading back to his own place.
But on his way home, he happens to spot her car parked down the street at a random, unremarkable apartment complex, a place where Barbara didn't know a single person.
He checks the car, finds the doors completely unlocked, and sees that handwritten goodbye note sitting right there on the passenger seat.
Jerry panics, assumes the worst regarding her mental health, and gathers her roommates. They all rush to the campus police station.
That first day, law enforcement treats it as a standard missing person report. Just a stressed college student blowing off steam.
But the very next morning, the situation takes a grim, irreversible turn.
50 miles north of the BYU campus, in a remote, highly elevated nature preserve called Big Cottonwood Canyon, a municipal utility worker is checking water lines.
He hikes to the top of a punishingly steep, isolated trail and sees a woman lying face down on the ground in the distance.
At first glance, he assumes she's just sunbathing, but as he gets closer, the reality sets in.
It is the freezing cold month of March. There is snow on the surrounding peaks, and she is completely nude.
He realizes she is dead and immediately runs back down the mountain to radio the police.
This is where we meet Salt Lake City Sheriff's Captain Pete Hayward. He arrives at this remote canyon and is confronted with a pristine, almost contradictory crime scene.
There are no signs of a struggle. No broken branches, no drag marks in the dirt, no discarded weapon. Just a deceased young woman with several visible gunshot wounds in her back.
But there is one bizarre detail that stands out above everything else. A detail that changes the entire complexion of the crime.
Her clothes and her shoes are folded incredibly neatly, stacked in a deliberate pile right next to her body.
What's fascinating here is how Captain Hayward reads the psychology of this scene. The trail up to this ridge was incredibly steep. It was physically exhausting for the trained investigators to hike up it.
Therefore, a killer could not possibly have dragged dead weight all the way up there without leaving a massive disturbance in the brush.
Exactly. The victim had to have walked up that trail willingly on her own 2 feet. And you don't hike into the remote wilderness with a stranger.
She walked up there alongside someone she trusted.
Furthermore, the neatly folded clothes suggest a paralyzing psychological dynamic. She wasn't ambushed or attacked in a sudden frenzy. She was forced to undress at gunpoint.
She was taking her time, meticulously folding each garment, likely in a desperate attempt to delay the inevitable and reason with her killer.
When the medical examiner gently turns her body over, they find that the bullets had gone straight through her torso and were lodged deep in the soil underneath.
Hayward orders his forensic team to carefully dig out the bullets, to test her skin for fibers. And this is the moment of sheer brilliance. He orders them to collect a large sample of the actual dirt from directly underneath her body.
And seal it in an evidence bag.
Yes.
The magnitude of this decision cannot be overstated. In 1974, DNA testing was the stuff of science fiction. It did not exist in criminal investigations.
Police relied on blood typing, hair comparison, and textile fibers. Scooping up a bag of bloody dirt to save in a humid evidence locker was a masterclass in forward-thinking forensics.
Hayward didn't know exactly what technology would be invented in the future, but he recognized that the soil acted as a sponge for the physical interaction between the fullet, the victim, and the earth.
And what he didn't realize is that soil, especially in a freezing, elevated environment like Big Cottonwood Canyon, acts like a natural time capsule.
The minerals and the freezing temperatures shield biological material from UV radiation and rapid bacterial degradation.
The next day, fingerprint analysis confirms the victim is Barbara Rocky. Captain Hayward now has a murder investigation and a roster of suspects to clear.
He starts with the roommates. Jerry had explicitly told Hayward about the extreme tension in the house, so Hayward brings all 7 girls in for questioning.
They don't hold back. They openly admit they did not like Barbara and were somewhat relieved she was leaving.
Which makes her goodbye note seem very literal. She was just running away from a toxic living situation.
But all 7 roommates provide airtight, corroborated alibis for the entirety of March 11th.
So the roommate theory is a dead end. But a vital lead emerges from those interviews. One of the girls mentions Barbara's plan to pawn that heavy turquoise necklace in Salt Lake City to fund her trip.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Hayward canvasses dozens of pawn shops and actually locates the specific store.
The clerk remembers Barbara vividly. He pulls a receipt for the necklace, time-stamped March 11th at 12:50 p.m.
And the clerk drops a massive clue. Barbara was frantic that day. She told the clerk to hurry up with the cash because her boyfriend was circling the block in her car outside, waiting for her.
Which completely shifts the parameters of the investigation. No one in Barbara's immediate circle, not even Jerry, had mentioned a local boyfriend with access to her car.
But as Hayward gets back to the precinct to process this, a deputy hits him with some bizarre news.
The long-distance psychic, Richard Finder, the man Barbara was planning to run away to. He has just called the police station out of the blue.
Wait, let me get this straight. This guy, who already claims to possess supernatural abilities, just voluntarily calls the homicide department while coincidentally vacationing near the murder scene.
Yes.
How did Captain Hayward not immediately arrest him on suspicion alone?
Well, he came incredibly close. Hayward sits Finder down in the interrogation room, absolutely convinced this is an arrogant killer playing a cat-and-mouse game with the police.
Finder casually claims he had a psychic vision that the murder weapon had been tossed into a large body of water.
This immediately puts Hayward on high alert, because law enforcement had deliberately withheld the fact that the murder weapon was missing from the crime scene.
How could Finder possibly know that unless he was the one who took it?
Add to that, Hayward discovers Finder legally owns a .357 Magnum, the exact caliber of the suspected murder weapon.
He was staying at a ski lodge dangerously close to Big Cottonwood Canyon. And when Hayward demands an alibi, Finder's friends admit he wandered off alone for large chunks of the day Barbara vanished.
That looks like a detective's dream scenario. You have motive, proximity, opportunity, and this bizarre, narcissistic insertion into the investigation.
But then the science gets in the way. In the 1970s, ballistics matching relied on comparison microscopes. Experts would fire a test bullet from the suspect's gun and compare the microscopic scratches.
The striations left by the barrel. They'd compare those against the bullet pulled from the crime scene. It's like a metallic fingerprint.
Hayward gets the report back on Finder's .357. The striations do not match the bullets pulled from the dirt.
The lead completely evaporates.
And without the murder weapon and without an eyewitness, the case stalls.
As the months turn into years, investigators grasp at straws. They even looked into the notorious serial killer Ted Bundy.
He was arrested in 1975, just an hour away from where Barbara lived, and his entire terrifying methodology involved targeting young college women with long, dark hair parted down the middle.
But Bundy was eventually ruled out. Employment and travel records proved conclusively that he was actively committing a different crime in Washington state on the exact day Barbara died in Utah.
So as the 1970s turned into the 1980s, and the 80s bled into the 90s, Barbara's case file gathered dust in a basement.
But while her file sat dormant, the world of forensic science was quietly undergoing a monumental revolution.
The invention of PCR DNA testing, polymerase chain reaction, it changed the game entirely.
It allowed scientists to take a minuscule, severely degraded fragment of biological material and amplify it into a readable genetic profile.
Which brings us to the year 2005. A new homicide investigator, Detective Todd Park, reopens the cold case at the urging of Barbara's sister.
Park reads the old files and immediately concludes the original detectives missed the forest for the trees.
The fact that Barbara was shot 5 times in the back and chest spoke to a deeply personal, emotionally charged crime of passion, not a random serial killer encounter.
Park focuses his attention entirely back on 2 men, the psychic, Richard Finder, and Barbara's so-called best friend, Jerry Hicker.
But Detective Park faces the immense, unforgiving frustration of time. He has the benefit of modern DNA technology, but biological evidence breaks down.
For 2 agonizing years, the medical lab tests Barbara's clothing. They test the swabs taken during the 1974 autopsy.
The results are a repeated blow to the investigation. The biological material is either completely destroyed by bacterial degradation over the decades, or it simply doesn't contain enough intact cells to generate a profile.
It is looking entirely hopeless.
But then, in October 2007, Park realizes there is one single piece of untested evidence left in the archival box.
The plastic bag of dirt.
He hadn't sent it in originally because it sounds absurd. Who thinks you're going to pull a killer's distinct genetic profile out of 30-year-old soil?
But it's his last resort. He sends it to the lab.
Think about the improbability of that for a second. Investigators in the disco era saved a literal scoop of dirt, decades before anyone knew what DNA even was. And now it serves as the final, desperate hope for justice.
And against all odds, the phone rings. The lab technicians tell Detective Park that the freezing temperatures of the canyon, combined with the specific mineral composition of the dirt, had acted as a protective barrier.
They actually found a distinct male DNA profile perfectly preserved in that soil sample, mixed in with Barbara's blood.
Park takes that newly amplified profile, runs it through the National Criminal Database, and gets a direct hit.
So what does this all mean? The name that pops up on Park's computer screen isn't the psychic Richard Finder.
It isn't Ted Bundy or some transient drifter.
The DNA belongs to Jerry Hicker,
Her closest confidant.
the guy who drove her car, consoled her roommates, and walked into the police station to report her missing.
It is the ultimate betrayal of trust. With the undeniable DNA evidence anchoring the timeline, investigators are finally able to reconstruct the precise events of March 11th.
Jerry had dropped off Barbara's car that morning, but when she abruptly left to pawn her necklace, Jerry didn't go home.
He got in the car with her. He was the impatient boyfriend circling the block while Barbara was inside the pawn shop negotiating for cash.
When she comes out, Jerry knows she has the money and is leaving town for good. He realizes he is losing his window of opportunity.
So he guilt trips her. He plays on their friendship, saying, "Hey, before you leave Utah forever, let's go for one last hike in the beautiful canyon."
Barbara is likely hesitant, anxious to hit the road, but she agrees. Jerry drives her car to Big Cottonwood Canyon. They hike up that punishingly steep, isolated trail together.
And once they are completely cut off from the world, Jerry makes his move.
He makes a forceful, romantic, and physical advance, but Barbara recoils. She rejects him, just as she had been rejecting the broader culture around her.
And this rejection deeply enrages Jerry. His ego is shattered. He feels humiliated.
So he reaches into his heavy winter coat and pulls out a gun, but not just any random weapon.
He pulls out Barbara's own missing gun, the one he had helped her purchase for safety, the one he had secretly stolen from her bedroom weeks earlier.
The psychological weight of those final moments is just staggering. Imagine the freezing mountain air, the profound isolation. Jerry aims her own weapon at her and forces her to strip.
Barbara, staring down the barrel of the gun she bought to protect herself, realizes she is completely trapped by the one person she thought was safe.
She tries desperately to buy herself time. She painstakingly, methodically folds every single piece of her clothing, stacking them neatly on the frozen ground, pleading with her best friend for her life.
But his bruised ego demands a devastating price. He shoots her 5 times, leaving her in the dirt.
He then flees down the mountain, tossing the gun and her purse into the heavy brush, and drives her car back down to Provo.
He deliberately parks it at that random apartment complex, specifically so her roommates won't see him dropping it off.
And in a final act of calculated misdirection, he leaves her genuine goodbye note sitting in plain sight on the passenger seat. Knowing the vague phrasing makes it look exactly like a suicide or a successful runaway attempt.
The profound irony of this case is difficult to stomach. Why was Jerry's DNA sitting in the national database for Detective Park to find in the first place?
Because the year after he murdered Barbara, he was linked to a terrifying string of violent campus rapes.
The original 1974 investigators didn't look too hard at him because he played the part of the cooperative grieving friend.
But statistically speaking, this perfectly illustrates the reality of victimology. We spend so much energy fearing the shadowy stranger in the alley or the notorious serial killer roaming the highways,
when the greatest danger is often someone we willingly let through the front door.
Barbara was murdered with the exact weapon she bought to protect herself, wielded by a man who represented the exact kind of monster she was terrified of.
And the resolution of the case carries its own heavy, complicated weight. By the time the DNA hit came back and Jerry was finally arrested in 2007, he was already an elderly man dying of aggressive cancer.
To avoid a grueling trial and secure a reduced sentence in a medical facility, he fully confessed to Barbara's murder, confirming the reconstruction of the crime.
He only served 5 years in prison before passing away in 2014. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this case stands as a towering monument to the absolute necessity of rigid forensic protocol.
Captain Pete Hayward and his team couldn't even spell DNA in 1974. But their meticulous adherence to evidence collection, saving that one inexplicable bag of dirt, allowed science the necessary runway to eventually catch up to the killer.
It really is an incredible testament to doing the job right, even when you don't know why you're doing it.
You come to these deep dives to learn, to look past the surface, and to get those aha moments that change how you see the world around you.
Absolutely.
Today, you've seen how a single bag of soil and a painstakingly folded pile of clothes managed to articulate the truth for a victim 30 years after her voice was stolen.
It's powerful.
It makes you wonder, sitting in dusty evidence lockers in police precincts all over the world right now, what seemingly useless everyday items, a piece of lint, a forgotten receipt, a scoop of dirt, are just quietly waiting for the technology of tomorrow to finally tell their story.